Hello and welcome to Norton Rose Fulbright's YouTube channel, Energy Transition, the Pace of Change. I'm Alexandra Jeffreys, a Senior Associate in the London office, and today I have the pleasure of hosting Davinder Mann and Esi Eshun from UK Export Finance, the UK's export credit agency. Davinder and Esi, welcome to the channel. So can we please start off by you both introducing yourselves and your roles at UKEF? And Esi, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Alex. As Alex said, UKEF is the UK's export credit agency, an ECA, and at over 100 years old, we're the oldest ECA in the world. And we provide financial assistance through various products to support UK exporters. So we're helping exporters to win business, fulfill contracts, and get paid. And as a full government department under the Secretary of State for Trade, and unlike many other countries' ECAs, we very much tread the line between public and private. A little bit about me. I am the Director of Legal and Compliance at UKEF, so I'm helping the department to manage their legal risks. And that includes the impact of the changing views on energy transition and what it has on UKEF's decision-making and the risk of challenge around those decisions. Davinder, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So my name is Davinder Mann. I am the Director of Strategy, Policy and Climate Change at UK Export Finance. So I oversee a directorate that has multiple disciplines in it, but the primary objective of which is to reflect the choices that UKEF wants to make in the business that it does to the extent that it can within the mandate that it has, that Esi has so neatly described, and also looks after some of the kind of key strategic issues of the day. So climate being one of them. So climate strategy, climate policy, TCFD, and we can talk a little bit more about that later as well. My remit also includes the international business. So our international relations team sits within this group, as does governance and information management as well, which is a nice little add-on to my strategic objectives.
As if you didn't have enough to do already. Now, there's been a lot of discussion at the moment about the energy transition. So, Esi, what does the energy transition mean for UKEF?
So I think part of the current focus on energy transition for the UK more generally is the UK government's fossil fuel policy. So as of March this year, the UK government's no longer providing financial support or promotional support for the fossil fuel energy sector overseas. And so that includes alignment with the Paris Agreement and whatever that means, and then encouragement of the just transition. So it's about finding a way to transition to lower carbon, but helping business along the way. And to that extent, the UK government fossil fuel policy has a number of exemptions representing exceptional circumstances where support from the UK government is warranted. An example of that can be giving the SMEs an opportunity to transition to green, acknowledging that their switch will be more difficult than the larger companies. Davinder, do you want to talk about what we're doing at UKEF as well?
Sure. So Esi has described the kind of broader HMG approach as it sees kind of UKEF's role, especially particularly in fossil fuels and international finance relating to fossil fuels. And broadly, we'll talk a little bit more about how that impacts us a bit later, hopefully. What we've also done in addition to that, so there's a direction the government has set for us and that we've helped shape. But in addition to that, we have ourselves looked at the choices that UKEF ought to make and really in keeping in line with the expectations on other financial institutions in the private sector and of the ambitions of HMG in the net zero space, we launched this September our climate strategy. So I guess that's the other kind of main feature of what energy transition means, or what we think energy transition means for UKEF. And our strategy will very much articulate what that vision is We can't talk about that too much today with the time that we've got, but broadly speaking, we are the second ECA in the world to take on a net zero by 2050 pledge. Within that pledge, we have 5 pillars to our strategy. Our first pillar is a pledge to increase our support to clean growth and climate adaptation. We have also agreed openly that we will be reducing our portfolio of greenhouse gas emissions. So the next year is very much about thinking about what those targets might look like and how we might approach that. We are looking at how we are going to apply climate risk assessment methodologies to our work. So how do we actually translate climate risk and how do we mitigate those risks in the department, given the physical and transition risks that climate poses. We are going to be transparent. We're going to disclose. So we committed to TCFD, again, task force for climate related disclosures. And finally, we're going to be providing hopefully some international leadership in this space by the government having given us a leading position, us having adopted as a leading position. We want to work with other ECAs and governments around the world to encourage a similar approach by them as well. And all of this while we continue to support British industry through the transition that it necessarily has to make.
Which is leading me on nicely to my next question, Davinder. So you've spoken a bit about how the energy transition will impact UKEF. How is it impacting your sector?
So we've talked a little bit about the fossil fuel policy. We've talked about UKEF's climate change strategy, which is our response. So we've kind of spoken about that a little bit. And how is it impacting us then? Well, it means that a whole bunch of traditional businesses that we supported now have to look at us differently. So we have to approach them and their needs differently. So where traditionally we've supported fossil fuels and we've supported businesses that have a high carbon footprint just because of the industrial makeup of the UK, very legitimate businesses, we have to now support them in a very different way. So rather than them coming to us and getting the support that they traditionally expected, we're now looking to support their transition. We're looking at similar issues internationally as well. So just from a strict business perspective, it means that the premium that we collect will be impacted. We're by Treasury, we're mandated to meet our costs. So all of a sudden, a traditional source of income that would have been brought in to help us meet our operational costs isn't there anymore. The kind of transactions we're left looking at are less traditional, a little bit more risky. So if you're looking at clean growth transactions, it just presents a completely different risk profile really in many places. So we've got to deal with that. A lot of the transactions are a little bit more complicated than they were before. So where we've got very used to these big industrial overseas projects in the fossil fuel space that we know and understand, that doesn't necessarily translate to some of these newer types of technologies that we might be dealing with. We're dealing with more SMEs in this kind of clean growth space than we had before. We've got substantial international competition for very similar deals from other ECAs around the world, other exporters in other countries. And actually the private money and public money is looking for the same types of transactions as well. So how do we partner in that space without stepping on the toes of the private sector? That's not what we're here to do. So how do we add value? We've got to work some of these things out from scratch. And the businesses that we deal with, they're not sometimes from a credit perspective as well established and strong as some of the businesses we've dealt with before. So if we look at UKEF as a business, that would be the main kind of impact, I would say. I mean, there's lots of positive opportunities which we can talk about as well a bit later. But essentially, I think broadly, that's the impact.
And Esi, did you want to add anything to Davinder's response? And in fact, if you could elaborate on how UKEF is responding to this change.
Yeah, so Davinder has set out a number of impacts that the wider public will identify as something that UKEF, like you said, has to respond to. But we're also not just responding in the public facing side, but also looking at what we're doing internally. And that's where most of our change and our response has come. So the things that you won't see outside of UKEF, but will be working towards the energy transition purpose, we're looking at our public law as a government department, our public law decision making. How are we deciding to take, or that we're deciding to take climate change into account in the decisions that we make to support transactions? And that means that it will, as one of the pillars that Davinder mentioned earlier, one of our pillars of our climate strategy is to take account of climate change. And we're trying to work out exactly how best to do that on a case-by-case basis and which relevant factors to consider and apply. And it meets our public law requirements, but it also meets other external requirements like aligning with the Paris Agreement, aligning with the government fossil fuel policy. So we're doing quite a lot of work in that space. So we're developing internal policies on transactions, and those are trying to reflect the external facing policies too. We're building our climate change teams. Davinder's team is leading on that in quite a strong way, but there are teams in our risk areas looking at ESG and risk considerations, stranded assets. There were a myriad of things that we need to consider when we're making our decision to support transactions. But there'll also be responses that you'll see outside of UKEF. So we're targeting clean growth transactions. So our originations team is going overdrive to work out what's out there in terms of UK know-how and UK expertise in the clean growth industry. So that's the traditional solar and the wind, but we're also looking at, kind of hydrogen, looking at gigafactories. It's anything new, anything that is climate positive or climate impact reducing. We have dedicated resources in the UK and abroad, bringing the business opportunities to the door. So that we're working in embassies across the world, but also across the UK as well, with our finance managers able to get to the customers and the business that we really want to get to in terms of clean growth. We're also looking at the way in which we look at the structures that are brought to us. So bespoke structuring, and most of these are very new to ECAs. People who work with ECAs know that we're pretty traditional historically, but UKEF is looking to see where we can encourage commercial financing by being flexible in our adoption of the structures that we support. And so we're kind of going back to the roots of the ECA by ensuring that ECAs try to lead the way to new technologies, new structurings, new ways of doing financing, and hopefully the financial industry will follow as well. And then we're also thinking about how flexible we can be with our risk criteria. So that's all still within our risk appetites and our legal limits, but these new technologies mean that we're having to look at the potential for repayment in a different way. I think, Davinder, you're going to talk a little bit about our products as well.
Yeah, yes, I will. Thanks, Esi. So just adding a couple of elements to what Esi's mentioned just there. So we, in our underwriting teams, we've got a new dedicated renewables and transition team. So they will be looking exclusively at these kinds of projects. And also we've got we're kind of building up this picture of an engine that's kind of primed and ready to go. And that really is where we are primed and ready to go. We're looking in the right places, but this is a new area that we have to venture into. We've got a strong pipeline as well, I would say. There is billions in the pipeline. We just still have to, all of this has to materialize. So it's honest to say that we're ready to go. We're really hopeful. We've got a whole brimming pipeline of deals. So, but the execution, the proof will be in the pudding. So we'll talk in a couple of years' time and see how we're doing with it. But we are very hopeful that we're going to get there. So just on the product side, very quickly, just to kind of finish off on this point. One of the ambitions that we have is to really look at our product suite and see, is there something that we could offer that would be more catered for the green, kind of the green space that we're trying to target, or with the transition theme. So one of the products that we've launched recently and that was announced in the government's response to the fossil fuel policy consultation back in the summer, or just before the summer, is our transition EDG product. So the EDG product is essentially a working capital facility offered to businesses in the UK who are exporters and have a substantial export threshold that they have to pass. So they have a substantial export business. So the transition EDG is supporting those businesses that are actively transitioning in a demonstrable way out of fossil fuels into more of the clean growth space. So that's quite a novel product that we are talking actually around to other ECAs around the world about as well, so that they can understand how that works. So one of the things we're also trying to do is targeting our biocredit support more specifically at exports for a company that perhaps is still heavy in the fossil fuel sector, but has a particular Green Deal that it would like to support as well. So that's just repurposing a product that we already have. So again, transitioning businesses can benefit in both those ways, either from working capital or from these targeted biocredits. We're looking at focusing our direct lending part at clean growth projects as well, and we'll continuously try to kind of build that support that we offer in that area as well. So I guess the message that we're trying to give is that we're consistently being innovative in this area, and we'll anyone got any good ideas, just bring them over and we'll have a look at if we can make that work.
Well, it's certainly exciting times ahead, and both of you have mentioned a number of opportunities and potential challenges down the road, but I'd be interested to know what you think are the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities coming up. So Esi, let's hear your thoughts first, and then Davinder, why don't you come in after?
And that's great. I'll start by caveating that by, remember I said I deal in risk, and so I will start with some of the challenges, but there are some really good opportunities to come out of this area. I think one of our biggest challenges, and it's one of the hardest to mitigate easily, is the public perception. It's the hearts and minds around energy transition, and as a public body we have to take that into consideration. So it's not only to those who we service, but also our stakeholders, but our staff, who are the people who are going to be living in this world and going to be living with the effects or the non-effects of energy transition. And so we are looking to make sure that we're as transparent as possible, another pillar of our climate strategy, but also to make decisions that are lasting, as opposed to just to meet expectations that are upon us right now. I think another challenge is around the changing standards of operations. So those are the international standards. I spoke before about the Paris Agreement and its great goals and aims, but the detail as to how you might implement and how you might align with it, I think, is to come, and it will be a challenge. But not just international standards, domestic standards. What is the UK government expecting from the companies, from UK companies? And alongside that comes the legal framework. So there will be more case law. There's limited case law at this point on how to consider climate change in your business, but it will inevitably increase and shape how we see the transition develop. For UKEF as a government department and a public body, that manifests itself in judicial review, and that's a real ongoing risk for us. But I think with the public scrutiny that NGOs and civil society bring to what we do, that being a risk right now can very much be an opportunity. So we're concentrating on climate change and net zero right now, but there are other standards that are coming up. So in the next 5 years, we're going to be hearing a lot more about biodiversity, about nature in the same kind of nature-related financial disclosures, and the SDGs are still developing. So there's just quite a bit more to think about in the next few years. but there will be opportunities too.
I mean, the opportunities, it's a new world, I think, this for everybody. So in some ways, the opportunities are infinite because we don't know what we're capable of, because for the first time, we are dedicating resource, energy, political will, all in the same direction, with a huge dose of kind of innovation and creativity. So we're building up our supply chains in the UK. So we are part of government. We see the effort that's going into that. Some of the recent announcements that we've had, building our supply chains at the same time, strengthening them and encouraging them to export and encouraging the exports that we have. And who knows what can happen if you put all of that together. So that is the biggest opportunity, is just that huge kind of convergence of effort and will and creativity that's taking place today. We are, for the first time, kind of really, say for the first time, we've been engaging for a long time with civil society and NGOs, but perhaps not in a strategic way. So what we're really hoping to do is, as part of our climate strategy, is to engage and listen in a much more positive way than we have before, and hopefully listen and pick up the concerns that civil society and the public have in this area, and respond to those sooner. And with that, you pick up ideas and approaches. So I think that's the greatest opportunity for sure. And then, of course, we're here to support the new, the kind of new carbon technologies, the carbon capture technologies as they develop as well. Just very quickly, there are challenges still. Esi's talked about the kind of legal framework and some of the challenges coming from that sector, but we have got a few others. So we have to still bring TCFD to life, this disclosure framework. So we are very early in our disclosure stage as yet, and we're working from going from a qualitative disclosure to a quantitative one, which means we have to change the way we collect data as an organisation, the way that we assess risk and the way that we report it. So that's a big project for us, like it is for many of the banks, or all of the banks as well. We have got to develop these decarbonisation targets, and then we have to stick to them. So there's that challenge as well. I wanted to focus for a moment on the UK's fossil fuel policy, which focuses our support essentially on clean growth. However, there are a lot of sectors that we can still support in line with that policy, but are still high emitting. So, supporting high emitting transactions that don't fall within the fossil fuel policy is a permitted government position, but still presents challenges for UKEF in line with this net zero strategy. So our efforts will be focused on making sure that those businesses are transitioning so that we can still support them as well.
Davinder and Esi, thank you so much for your time today and for your valuable insights. I'm sure there will be a lot of watchers out there who have really enjoyed this session. And thank you all for listening. If you want to hear more about energy transition, subscribe to our channel and don't miss the next episode.